The sky split open without warning. Not metaphorically, not gradually, it tore like fabric under invisible hands, spilling purple light across the afternoon clouds. The sound came after a deep, groaning rumble that rattled windows across 3 city blocks and sent car alarms screaming into panicked chorus. Below the wound in reality, the street was already carnage. 2 Viltrumite soldiers hovered 30 feet above the asphalt, their white and gray uniforms pristine despite the blood coating their fists. One of them held a man by the throat, squeezing until vertebrae popped like bubble wrap. The body dropped when the Viltrumite lost interest, hitting the pavement with the wet sound of a dropped steak. Civilians ran in every direction. Some made it, most didn't. The guardians of the globe were trying. Immortal crashed into the nearest Viltrumite with enough force to shatter every window on the block, driving the alien warrior through a parked bus. Metal shrieked. The bus folded like aluminum foil. Black Samson pulled 3 people from a collapsing storefront, his enhanced strength barely sufficient to lift the concrete beam, pinning them down. Adam Eve erected shimmering barriers between fleeing crowds and falling debris, her face twisted with concentration and sweat. It wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. Through the rift overhead, something fell. Not flew, not descended with purpose, fell tumbling end over end like a rock dropped from a bridge. The figure plummeted through 800 feet of open air in 3 seconds flat and hit the intersection of 4th and Madison with an impact that should have vaporized concrete and shattered water mains. Instead, the street cracked in a perfect circle maybe 10 feet across. Dust puffed upward in a modest cloud. The shockwave, if it could be called that, barely disturbed the nearby papers scattered across the sidewalk. A man stood up from the shallow crater, bald, yellow suit with a white cape, red gloves and boots. His expression registered somewhere between mild annoyance and profound boredom. The look of someone who'd just realized they'd taken the wrong train. He brushed dust from his shoulder with one hand, glanced at his surroundings with the interest of a commuter, checking a bus schedule, and frowned at a scuff mark on his glove. The nearest Viltrumite noticed him immediately. The soldier's enhanced vision locked onto the anomaly with predatory focus, and he broke off from pursuing Immortal to investigate. He covered the distance in a heartbeat, sonic boom trailing behind him like thunder, and stopped 10 feet away with arms crossed. His mustache regulation Viltrumite style bristled with contempt. "Identify yourself," the soldier barked. His voice carried the absolute authority of someone who'd never been refused. The bald man looked up slowly, as if noticing the 7-foot warrior for the first time. His eyes held no fear, no recognition, no emotion whatsoever. "My back hurts," he said, tone flat as week-old soda. He rotated one shoulder experimentally, then returned his attention to the scuff mark. 300 miles away in a bunker complex buried beneath the Pentagon, every alarm in the Global Defense Agency command center started screaming at once. Monitors blazed red. Satellite feeds zoomed and refocused. Seismic sensors registered the atmospheric entry but couldn't reconcile the impact data with the visible damage. Cecil Stedman, director of the GDA, stood before the main display wall with hands clasped behind his back. His face, weathered and skeptical even on good days, had hardened into something resembling carved granite. Around him, analysts scrambled between workstations, their voices overlapping in controlled panic. "Sir, we have an unidentified atmospheric breach." One analyst reported fingers dancing across her keyboard. "Object originated from..." She stopped, frowned, checked her readings again. "From nowhere. No point of origin. It just appeared at 60,000 feet and dropped." "Classification?" Cecil asked without turning. "Unknown. Humanoid. Impact velocity should have been terminal. Crater depth is..." Another pause. 4 inches, sir. 4 inches. Cecil's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Deploy additional surveillance. I want every camera within 5 miles pointed at that intersection. Get me Donald, and get me a direct line to the Guardians. He finally turned his gaze sweeping across the room like a prison searchlight. Whatever that thing is, it doesn't belong here. Treat it as hostile until proven otherwise. Back at the intersection, the Viltrumite soldier's patience had evaporated. You will identify yourself, or I will. The bald man raised one hand in a gesture that might have been surrender, or might have been a request to pause. Is there a convenience store nearby? He asked. His voice carried the same flat effect, completely disconnected from the screaming chaos behind him. I was going to assail. The Viltrumite stared. For 3 full seconds, the alien warrior trained from birth in combat, feared across a dozen star systems, unaccustomed to disrespect, simply stared. Blood dripped from his knuckles. Smoke rose from burning cars. In the background, Adam Eve screamed a warning as another civilian was caught by the second Viltrumite. You mock me, the soldier finally said. His voice dropped an octave, vibrating with barely contained rage. The bald man blinked once. No, I need vegetables. The Viltrumite moved faster than human eyes could track, closing the distance in a microsecond, with his fist already accelerating toward the bald man's face. The punch carried enough force to pulverize reinforced steel, to shatter bones into dust, to reduce a normal human to a red mist. His fist connected with flesh and stopped cold. Not deflected, not absorbed. Stopped as if he'd tried to punch bedrock. The shock wave rippled outward in a perfect circle, explosive and indiscriminate. Glass detonated from every storefront within 50 feet. 2 parked cars flipped onto their sides like discarded toys. A woman running past the pharmacy took the pressure wave full in the chest and ragdolled backward into a fire hydrant neck, bent at an angle that promised she wouldn't get up. A man clutching his daughter stumbled, and both went down as the blast stripped skin from their backs like sandpaper. The bald man's head moved perhaps 1/8 of an inch. His expression didn't change. The Viltrumite pulled his hand back, staring at his own knuckles with something that might have been confusion, might have been the first whisper of fear. He looked up at the bald man's face, still bored, still utterly unconcerned, and felt his combat training war with sensory data that insisted he'd just punched a planet. In his bunker, watching through a satellite feed that updated faster than human perception, Cecil Stedman spoke 2 words into his headset, quiet and final as a coffin lid closing. We're screwed. The Viltrumite pulled his fist back slowly, staring at his knuckles as if they'd betrayed him. Microscopic fractures spiderwebbed across the bones in his hand, invisible to the naked eye, but screaming through his nervous system. He'd punched mountains before, broken asteroids, killed opponents whose durability exceeded reinforced titanium. This bald man in the yellow suit hadn't even blinked. Behind him, Immortal drove the second Viltrumite through 3 stories of an apartment building. Concrete and rebar exploded outward. Someone's living room became open air. A family eating dinner found themselves suddenly exposed to the sky, their table bisected by a support beam that crashed through the floor. The father grabbed his son and ran. The mother never made it off her chair before the ceiling came down. Adam Eve's voice cut through the chaos, high and desperate. We need evacuation. The whole block needs... A sonic boom interrupted her as the first Viltrumite rocketed skyward, abandoning the anomaly to rejoin his partner. She didn't finish the sentence. There wasn't time. Black Samson pulled himself from the wreckage of a collapsed storefront, blood streaming from a gash above his eye. He spotted the bald man standing motionless in the crater, apparently inspecting something on his glove, and made a decision based on incomplete information and adrenaline-fueled desperation. Unknown combatant. Center of the impact zone. Too calm, too composed. Guardian protocol, he muttered into his comm. We have a third hostile. He crossed the distance in 4 ground-eating strides and threw everything he had into an uppercut aimed at the bald man's jaw. His enhanced strength enough to dent armored vehicles connected squarely. The impact produced a sound like a gunshot. Black Samson's wrist snapped backward, bones grinding together in a way that made his vision white out for a half-second. The bald man's head tilted upward, maybe half an inch, then returned to neutral. He looked at Black Samson with the mild curiosity of someone noticing a mosquito. "Excuse me," the bald man said. His voice carried no anger, no concern, just a flat statement of fact. "You're in the way." Black Samson stumbled backward, cradling his shattered wrist. "Adam, Eve, we've got a problem." 3 blocks away in a GDA mobile command unit that had been racing toward the combat zone, Cecil Stedman watched the tactical feed with the expression of a man calculating acceptable losses. The satellite imagery updated every 1/10 of a second. Thermal scans, seismic readings, atmospheric disturbance patterns. Every sensor told the same impossible story. "Sir, should we engage?" his tactical officer asked. Cecil's response was immediate. "Deploy the kaiju. Authorization code Whiskey 7 Tango, and get me a firing solution for the orbital platform." "Sir, there are still civilians in the—" "I'm aware." Cecil's voice could have frozen nitrogen. "Do it anyway." Adam, Eve saw Black Samson go down and reacted instantly, throwing up a barrier of shimmering purple energy between the bald man and her teammate. The construct solidified into something approximating diamond molecular bonds, locked tight enough to withstand small arms fire. She poured more power into it, reinforcing the structure until it hummed with contained force. The bald man looked at the barrier with the same bored expression he'd maintained since falling through the sky. He reached out and tapped it once with his index finger. The entire construct shattered like glass struck by a wrecking ball. Purple fragments dissolved into nothing. The backlash of broken energy threw Adam Eve 30 feet backward into the side of a delivery truck, hard enough to leave a woman-shaped dent in the metal. She hit the pavement, gasping ribs, screaming. "Target is engaging Guardians," an analyst reported in Cecil's ear. "Kaiju ETA 40 seconds. Rex Splode emerged from behind an overturned bus, both hands already glowing with unstable molecular charges. He didn't hesitate, didn't call out a warning. He just threw. 6 explosive spheres traced perfect arcs through the air, each one calibrated to detonate on impact with enough force to level a small building. The bald man turned his head slightly, tracking the incoming projectiles with academic interest. He raised one hand in a gesture that might have been a wave or might have been swatting at a fly. The motion created a gust of displaced air that caught the explosives mid-flight and redirected them. 3 detonated against the second story of an office building, blowing out the entire floor in a cascade of fire and debris. 1 hit a parked ambulance, vaporizing the vehicle and the paramedic who'd been crouched behind it. Another struck the street itself, creating a crater that swallowed 2 fleeing civilians before they could scream. The last one arced back toward Rex Splode himself. He dove sideways. The explosion caught him anyway, searing flesh and throwing him through a pharmacy window in a shower of glass and burning cloth. The ground began to shake, not from combat, from something approaching, something massive. The kaiju rounded the corner of 5th Avenue like a biological avalanche 40 feet tall at the shoulder, flesh grafted with cybernetic enhancements that pulsed with sickly green bioluminescence. The GDA had built it from genetic material salvaged from a dozen different sources, most of them classified, all of them designed to kill. Armored plates covered vulnerable areas. Claws the size of cars extended from hands capable of crushing tank armor. It roared a sound that triggered car alarms for 6 blocks and shattered windows that had somehow survived everything else. The kaiju charged. The street buckled under its weight. A fire hydrant exploded, sending a geyser of water 30 feet high. Civilians who'd been hiding in doorways broke and ran. Some made it. Most didn't. The creature's foot came down on a sedan with a father and son trapped inside, buckling metal and extinguishing lives in the same instant. The bald man looked up at the approaching monster. His expression shifted from boredom to something that might have been mild annoyance. He sighed a tiny exhalation of breath that carried the weight of infinite disappointment. The kaiju's massive claw swept down in an arc designed to bisect buildings. The bald man didn't move, didn't dodge, didn't raise his hands in defense. The claw connected with his shoulder and stopped. Completely, instantly, as if the creature had tried to grab a mountain. The kaiju's entire arm crumpled backward, bones snapping in sequence from the point of impact all the way to the shoulder socket. It screamed a sound of pure animal confusion and pain. The creature stumbled sideways into an apartment complex, bringing down 12 stories of concrete and steel. Dust billowed outward in a choking cloud. Emergency sirens wailed. Somewhere in the wreckage, someone was screaming. Then they weren't. The bald man looked down at his shoulder where the kaiju had struck. A small scratch marred his suit, barely visible. He frowned at it, then brushed the spot with his hand as if removing lint. "That was my favorite cape," he said to no one in particular. 300 miles away, Cecil Stedman stood in his bunker and watched the satellite feed with the absolute stillness of someone who'd just realized his entire career had been preparation for a problem that couldn't be solved. His hand moved to the communication panel. His voice, when he spoke, carried no emotion whatsoever. "Activate the orbital laser. Fire on my mark." "Sir, the Guardians are still in the—" "I know." High above the planet in geosynchronous orbit, weapon systems that officially didn't exist began to cycle. Targeting lasers painted the intersection where a bald man in a yellow suit stood surrounded by devastation he hadn't caused but also hadn't prevented. Power cells charged. Capacitors hummed. The barrel, wider than most houses, aligned with mathematical precision. Cecil pressed the button. Light fell from heaven like the wrath of an indifferent god. The beam descended in absolute silence. No thunder, no warning scream of displaced air. Just light, pure and white, and impossibly concentrated, a column of energy 3 feet wide that connected orbit to Earth in the span of a heartbeat. When it struck, the intersection ceased to exist as a recognizable location. Asphalt vaporized instantly. Concrete turned to glass and then to nothing. The shockwave tore outward in an expanding ring that stripped flesh from bone within 100 feet and pulverized everything within 200. Buildings didn't collapse, they disintegrated, walls and windows, and steel frames reduced to dust by heat that turned air itself luminescent. Cars became vapor, streetlights became ash. People became nothing at all, their existence erased so quickly their nervous systems never registered pain. The beam held for 3 full seconds. An eternity, a blink. When it cut off, what remained was a perfectly circular crater 60 feet deep and 200 feet across, walls fused into black glass that still glowed red at the edges. Steam rose from the pit in thick columns, carrying with it the smell of ionized air and things that had been alive moments before. Silence descended. Not peace, just the stunned quiet that follows absolute devastation. Dust hung in the air like a shroud backlit by fires that burned without sound. The few survivors who could still move did so in shocked silence, crawling over rubble with the mechanical movements of the traumatized. Someone was crying somewhere, a thin sound barely audible over the crackle of flame. Emergency sirens wailed from blocks away, growing closer but not fast enough. Never fast enough, asked. In the center of the crater, something moved. The bald man stood exactly where he'd been standing. Arms at his sides, expression unchanged. His yellow suit showed a black scorch mark across the chest, roughly the size of a dinner plate. He looked down at it, tilted his head slightly, and brushed at the stain with one gloved hand. It didn't come off. He frowned. "This isn't coming out," he said to the empty air. His voice carried no particular emotion, just observation. The air above the crater tore open with a sonic boom that shattered every intact window within 3 blocks. A figure descended through the smoke and dust, white cape billowing behind him, landing on the opposite edge of the crater with enough force to crack the glass-smooth surface. Omni-Man stood 7 feet tall in his white and red uniform mustache, bristling eyes locked onto the anomaly with the focus of a predator that had found something unprecedented. Nolan Grayson had lived for thousands of years, had conquered planets, had killed opponents whose power exceeded anything Earth had to offer. He recognized durability when he saw it, and what stood in that crater shouldn't exist. Nothing survived an orbital strike, nothing biological, nothing carbon-based, nothing within the known parameters of Viltrumite intelligence databases. "What are you—" Omni-Man's voice carried across the crater, deep and controlled. Not a question, a demand. The bald man looked up slowly, meeting Nolan's gaze with eyes that held neither challenge nor submission. Just that same flat, affect the expression of someone mildly annoyed at being interrupted. "I was grocery shopping." Omni-Man's jaw tightened. He'd interrogated warlords, broken the will of planetary defense coordinators, extracted secrets from beings that barely qualified as biological. This response, casual, nonsensical, utterly divorced from the reality of the situation, registered as either extreme psychological warfare or genuine disconnection from survival instinct. "That wasn't an answer," Omni-Man said. He began walking down the crater wall, each step deliberate. "I'll ask once more. What are you?" The bald man's frown deepened slightly. "I need to buy vegetables before the sale ends." Nolan moved. Not at full speed, he still maintained enough caution to test the target, but fast enough that human perception would have registered only a blur. He covered 40 feet in a tenth of a second and drove his fist into the bald man's face with enough kinetic energy to level a city block. The impact created a shockwave that propagated upward and outward, blowing the remaining dust clear of the crater in one explosive pulse. The ground beneath the bald man's feet cracked, but didn't crater. His head moved backward maybe 2 inches. His neck impossibly didn't snap. His body somehow didn't even rock back on his heels. Omni-Man pulled his fist back and stared at his knuckles. Unbroken. No pain. But the sensation that had traveled up his arm defied everything he understood about combat. He'd struck something that shouldn't exist. His Viltrumite instincts honed over millennia to read impact and resistance returned nothing. No give, no absorption, just a wall where flesh should have been. "Okay," Omni-Man said quietly. He grabbed the bald man by the shoulders and accelerated upward. They broke the sound barrier before clearing the crater's edge. Mach 2 before reaching 100 feet. Mach 5 as they punched through the cloud layer, trailing a sonic boom that shattered windows across 8 city blocks and triggered every car alarm that still functioned. People on the streets below looked up at the contrail, then dove for cover as debris began raining down, not from the fighters, but from the sheer atmospheric displacement their passage created. At 30,000 feet, Omni-Man shifted his grip and hurled the bald man downward with every ounce of strength his Viltrumite heritage could generate. The throw accelerated its target past terminal velocity, past the speed where air resistance meant anything, transforming the bald man into a kinetic weapon aimed at the earth below. He struck the abandoned Statesman Hotel at a 45-degree angle, passed through 17 floors without slowing, and emerged from the basement, still accelerating downward. The building stood for almost 2 full seconds before structural integrity failed completely. It collapsed inward 30 stories of concrete and steel, and everything human beings had built inside folding into a massive pile that sent dust billowing outward for 3 blocks. Somewhere in that wreckage were 63 homeless people who'd been squatting in the lower floors, None of them had time to run. Omni-Man descended through the dust cloud and found the bald man standing in a crater of pulverized concrete, brushing dust from his cape. Not injured, not winded, not even disheveled beyond the coating of gray powder that covered his suit. He looked up at Omni-Man with the same bored expression. "You made me drop my coupon," the bald man said. Something in Omni-Man's chest tightened. Not fear. Not yet. But something adjacent to it. The recognition that he'd entered a situation where the normal rules, the rules that had governed every fight in his 1,000-year existence, no longer applied. He thought of Mark, of Debbie, of the empire he served, and the mission he'd been assigned. None of it mattered if he couldn't neutralize this anomaly. "No more testing," Omni-Man said. He clenched his fists. No more restraint. He moved as a blur and drove both fists into the bald man's chest. Once. Twice. 17 times in 3 seconds each impact, generating enough force to shatter mountains. The crater beneath them deepened with each strike, descending through concrete and bedrock and ancient geological strata. Water mains burst. Gas lines ruptured. The shockwaves propagated through the city's foundation, bringing down 3 more buildings that had already been weakened by previous combat. The bald man's expression didn't change. Omni-Man grabbed him by the head and flew horizontally, dragging his opponent through 4 buildings in sequence. Glass and concrete and steel turned to shrapnel. Office workers at their desks had one instant to look up before the wall exploded inward. Some threw themselves under desks, some ran for exits. None of the ones in the direct path survived. The bald man's body carved through support pillars like they were paper, bringing down each structure in sequence. By the time Omni-Man released his grip, 600 people were buried under rubble, and that number was still climbing. The bald man stood up from the wreckage of what had been a law firm's conference room. He looked at Omni-Man with something that might have been patience wearing thin. "Are you finished?" Omni-Man attacked again. And again. And again. He fought with the desperate intensity of someone who'd realized they were facing an extinction-level problem, and responded with the only solution Viltrumite culture had ever taught him: overwhelming violence. He punched and kicked and grappled and threw, each technique honed over centuries of combat. Each strike delivered with enough power to devastate armies. Nothing worked. After 5 minutes of continuous assault, 5 minutes that transformed 6 city blocks into smoking ruins and killed an estimated 2,000 people through direct impact or structural collapse, Omni-Man stopped, not because he chose to, because his body, engineered for endurance beyond human comprehension, was beginning to register exhaustion. His breathing had deepened. Sweat cut tracks through the dust coating his face. His uniform showed tears and bloodstains, though none of the blood was the bald man's. The bald man stood in the center of devastation with his hands in his pockets, waiting, patient, unbothered. "What are you?" Omni-Man asked again. This time his voice carried something it hadn't before. Not fear. Not quite. But something that recognized fear's existence in the room. The bald man considered the question with the seriousness of someone being asked about their preferred brand of cereal. "A hero. For fun, I guess." Omni-Man processed this. Hero. The word meant something different on this planet than it did in Viltrumite. Heroes here wore capes and saved civilians and operated under the delusion that morality mattered in a universe governed by strength. This thing in the yellow suit called itself a hero, while standing in a tomb of its own inadvertent making expression unchanged, apparently unaware that its mere presence had transformed a city center into a mass grave. "You're no hero," Omni-Man said quietly. "You're something else." The bald man shrugged. It was a remarkably human gesture made horrifying by the context. "Okay." Omni-Man clenched his fists one more time and considered his options. He could continue fighting, but his Viltrumite tactical analysis had already concluded that outcome 0 probability of success. He could retreat, but that meant abandoning Earth to whatever this entity represented. He could call for backup, but the nearest Viltrumite forces were months away, and he doubted they'd fare better. For the first time in 1,000 years, Nolan Grayson didn't know what to do. The bald man pulled one hand from his pocket and made a small pushing motion with his palm, the gesture barely visible. It wasn't a punch, wasn't a strike. Just a gentle extension of his arm, the kind of movement someone might use to nudge a door open. Omni-Man flew backward as if struck by a continental plate. He covered 3 miles in 2 seconds before his trajectory intersected with the ground, impacting with enough force to create a crater visible from orbit. He lay there not unconscious. Viltrumite physiology didn't allow for easy unconsciousness, but stunned in a way that transcended the physical. Every nerve ending screamed, every bone ached, every muscle fiber registered trauma that shouldn't have been possible. He pushed himself to his hands and knees, coughing blood, and looked back toward the city center. Through dust and smoke and distance, he could just make out the small figure in yellow, still standing in the same spot. Still waiting, still unbothered. 300 miles away, Cecil Stedman watched the satellite feed update with casualty estimates. The numbers climbed past 2,000, then 3. The algorithm projected 4,000 by the time emergency services could establish a perimeter. He closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds, the only concession to emotion he'd permit himself, and opened a channel to every asset the GDA controlled. Nolan Grayson had one coherent thought. Before his body demanded rest, he couldn't refuse. This isn't an opponent. This is a natural disaster with a face. The GDA bunker, 300 miles beneath the Pentagon, hummed with barely contained chaos. Every screen showed a different angle of the same impossible reality. Thermal imaging registered a humanoid figure standing in what used to be downtown body temperature, perfectly normal, despite having survived weaponry designed to crack tectonic plates. Seismic sensors tracked tremors from collapsed buildings, spreading outward in concentric circles. Casualty algorithms updated every 3 seconds, numbers climbing past 4,000 confirmed dead, with projections reaching 8,000 once rescue operations concluded. Cecil Stedman stood at the center of it all, hands clasped behind his back, face carved from stone. Around him, analysts worked with the frantic precision of people who understood that hesitation meant more bodies. Donald Ferguson appeared at his shoulder, tablet in hand, expression grim. "Sir, we've confirmed Omni-Man is down," Donald reported. "Alive but incapacitated. 3 miles outside the combat zone. Medical team en route." "Leave him," Cecil said without turning. "He's not the priority." Donald blinked. "Sir, he lost." Cecil's voice could have flashed frozen mercury. "Which means everything we thought we knew about power scaling on this planet just became obsolete. What's the status on Project Ragnarok?" "The Reanimen are mobilizing. Sinclair estimates 20 units combat ready within the hour. But sir, after what we just witnessed, I don't care." Cecil turned, and Donald took an involuntary step backward from the look in his director's eyes. "Deploy them. Deploy everything. I want every experimental weapon we've been keeping off the books. I want the kaiju reserves. I want Donald." He stopped himself, realizing he was talking to Donald. "Get me robot, now." Across the city, Mark Grayson pulled himself from the wreckage of a collapsed parking garage, blood running from a cut above his eye. His invincible suit, designed to withstand Viltrumite-level impacts, hung in tatters. He'd been 3 blocks away when his father's final exchange with the anomaly had brought down half the financial district. The shockwave alone had nearly killed him. He staggered through smoke and dust, searching for survivors. Found a woman pinned under a steel beam, both legs crushed. She looked up at him with eyes that held too much pain for screaming. He lifted the beam with strength that felt inadequate, pathetic. She didn't survive the movement. Her body went limp before he could set the metal down gently. Mark's comm unit crackled. Cecil's voice cut through the static. "Invincible, report." Mark's voice cracked. He cleared his throat, tried again. "I'm doing search and rescue. There are people trapped everywhere. We need medical teams. You need to clear the area," Cecil interrupted. "We're deploying heavy ordnance in 60 seconds. Mark froze. Around him, fires burned in buildings that still had people inside. He could hear them screaming. Dozens of voices, maybe hundreds, crying for help that wasn't coming fast enough. "There are still civilians here. You can't. Watch me." The line went dead. Mark looked toward the city center where smoke rose in massive columns, backlit by flames that painted the sky orange. Somewhere in that devastation stood the bald man who'd walked through everything Viltrumite attacks, orbital strikes his father's 1,000 years of combat experience without breaking stride. Mark had seen the footage, watched the thermal replays. The man hadn't even been trying. He activated his comm again. "Cecil, please. Just give me 10 minutes. I can get these people out." No response. Mark's fists clenched. His father had taught him about duty, about making hard choices, about the necessity of sacrifice in service to the greater good. But his mother had taught him something different. Had taught him that every life mattered, that power came with responsibility, that heroes didn't calculate acceptable losses. He flew toward the city center, knowing he was probably flying toward his own death, unable to do anything else. The first wave of reanimen dropped from 3 GDA transport helicopters, cybernetic corpses reanimated with machinery that technically violated a dozen international treaties. They hit the ground running, each one capable of bench-pressing a semi-truck skin, replaced with armor-plating eyes glowing with targeting systems that locked onto the lone figure standing in the crater. They charged as a coordinated unit, 20 strong, moving with inhuman speed and zero self-preservation instinct. The bald man looked up from examining his glove and sighed a tiny sound of disappointment that somehow carried across 100 feet of devastation. The first reaniman swung a fist that could shatter concrete. The bald man leaned slightly to the left. The punch missed by an inch, and the reaniman's momentum carried it past arm, hyperextending with a screech of tearing metal and breaking bones. It collapsed in a sparking heap. The others adapted instantly, surrounding him, attacking from all angles with machined precision. Fists and feet and weaponized limbs struck from every direction. The bald man stood motionless in the center of the swarm, letting them hit him, and every impact resulted in catastrophic mechanical failure. Armor plating crumpled. Hydraulics burst. Cybernetic limbs tore themselves apart on contact with flesh that refused to acknowledge the concept of damage. 15 seconds. That's how long it took for 20 of the GDA's most expensive weapons to reduce themselves to scrap metal around a man who hadn't moved his feet. "Target is neutralizing reaniman without counterattacking," an analyst reported in Cecil's ear. "Sir, it's not fighting back, it's just standing there." "I can see that." Cecil's jaw worked. He pulled up another screen, cycled through options, made a decision he'd live with or die from. "Activate the Mauler units and prep the atmospheric cannon." "Sir, the atmospheric cannon hasn't been tested. We don't know." "It's tested now." Mark landed 50 feet from the bald man boots, hitting rubble hard enough to crack concrete. The anomaly turned its head, slowly acknowledged his presence with the same bored expression it had maintained since falling from the sky. Up close, Mark could see details the cameras had missed. The yellow suit somehow still mostly intact beneath the dust and scorch marks. The cape torn but still attached. The face utterly human and utterly empty of anything Mark understood as emotion. "Please," Mark said, hands raised in a gesture that was half surrender, half plea. "Just stop. Whatever you are, whatever you want, we can talk about it. You don't have to." "I'm not doing anything," the bald man said. His voice carried no hostility, no defensiveness, just a flat statement of fact. Mark looked around at the destruction, the fires, the bodies visible in the rubble. "You've killed thousands of people." The bald man followed his gaze, seemed to notice the devastation for the first time, and frowned slightly. "Oh, I didn't mean to." The words hit Mark harder than any punch his father had ever thrown. Didn't mean to. As if mass casualty was an accident. As if thousands of lives were a side effect he'd failed to consider. Mark opened his mouth to respond and found no words adequate. A low rumble began to build, coming from everywhere at once. The air pressure changed, pushing down like a physical weight. Mark's enhanced hearing picked up the sound of massive machinery cycling to life somewhere in high orbit. "You need to run," Mark said urgently. "They're going to hit this location with everything they have. I don't care what you survived before this is." The bald man's eyes shifted upward, tracking something Mark couldn't see. "Is this going to take long? I really need to find a store." Mark stared at him. Just stared. Somewhere in the distance, Cecil Stedman gave an order. Capacitors charged. Weapons systems aligned. The atmospheric cannon, designed as humanity's last resort against Viltrumite invasion, prepared to deliver enough kinetic energy to level a small mountain. The bald man reached into his pocket, pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, and examined it with mild disappointment. "The coupon expired," he said to no one in particular. Mark grabbed him by the shoulders, tried to pull him toward cover. It was like trying to move a building. The bald man didn't resist, didn't react, just stood there with the patience of geological formations, while Mark's Viltrumite strength accomplished exactly nothing. "Please," Mark said one more time, desperation bleeding through. "Please just move." The bald man looked at him with something that might have been curiosity. "Why are you still here?" Above them, the sky began to burn white. In his bunker, Cecil pressed the button and felt nothing at all. The atmospheric cannon fired with the sound of reality tearing. Not an explosion, not thunder. Something deeper, fundamental. The noise that physics made when forced beyond tolerances it was designed to handle. A projectile the size of a shipping container, accelerated through magnetic rails in high orbit, entered the atmosphere at 8 times the speed of sound. Friction turned its outer shell white-hot. The air around it ignited. By the time it reached the lower atmosphere, it trailed a column of superheated plasma that carved a luminous scar across the afternoon sky. Mark saw it coming. Had maybe 3 seconds to process the trajectory, calculate the impact zone, realize with absolute certainty that both he and the bald man stood directly in the kill radius. His father's training kicked in. Assess, adapt, survive. He grabbed the anomaly's arm with both hands, put everything he had into one desperate pull, trying to get them both clear. The bald man didn't move. Might as well have been welded to bedrock. The projectile struck. The kinetic energy alone would have vaporized a city block. The resulting shockwave propagated outward in a perfect sphere of compressed air that shattered windows 10 miles away and triggered seismographs on 3 continents. The ground beneath the impact site liquefied, then compressed into glass under pressures that shouldn't exist outside stellar cores. A mushroom cloud of dust and debris climbed 6,000 feet in 8 seconds. When the dust began to settle, when the ringing silence that followed apocalyptic violence descended, Mark found himself on his back 40 feet from where he'd been standing. His ears bled. His vision swam. Every bone in his body screamed. He couldn't remember being thrown, couldn't remember anything between the flash and now. He pushed himself up on shaking arms and looked toward the impact crater. Expected nothing. No survivors, no structures, just a hole in the earth where downtown used to exist. The bald man stood in the exact center of the crater, one arm still extended. The position looked awkward, unnatural, like he'd been frozen mid-gesture. Mark's oxygen-starved brain took 3 full seconds to process what he was seeing. The anomaly had raised his arm, not to defend himself, to block the shockwave that would have killed Mark. Had done it without moving his feet, without shifting his weight, with the casual efficiency of someone swatting a mosquito. "You okay?" the bald man asked. His voice carried clearly across the distance, conversational, like they were meeting at a bus stop. Mark tried to answer, coughed blood instead. Tried again. "You saved me." The bald man lowered his arm, looked at it as if surprised to find it there, then shrugged. "You were standing too close." Before Mark could process that non-answer, the air tore open with 6 simultaneous sonic booms. Viltrumites descended from the sky like falling stars, white capes streaming behind them, faces carved from controlled rage. They formed a perimeter around the crater, professional and precise. Mark recognized the formation from his father's training. Containment pattern. Used for targets too dangerous to approach directly. The lead Viltrumite, a woman with a scar bisecting her left eye, floated at the crater's edge. Her voice carried the absolute authority of someone who'd conquered star systems. "Identify yourself." The bald man looked up at her with the same bored expression he'd worn since arriving. "I'm looking for vegetables." The scarred Viltrumite's jaw tightened. She glanced at her companions, then back at the anomaly. Mark could see the calculation in her eyes. Reports had reached Viltrum Command, orbital footage, Omni-Man's defeat. The escalating body count. Whatever this thing was, it represented a threat to the Empire itself. "Last chance," she said. "What species are you?" "Human, probably." The bald man tilted his head. "Do you know where the nearest store is?" The scarred Viltrumite gave a hand signal. All 6 Viltrumites attacked simultaneously, converging on the bald man from different angles at speeds that turned them into blurs. They'd coordinated this, trained for it. Each one capable of destroying mountains, working together with military precision. The first Viltrumite reached him at Mach 4 and threw a punch that would have split a moon. His fist connected with the bald man's stomach and stopped. Completely. The Viltrumite's forearm bones shattered backward, compound fractures tearing through skin and muscle. He screamed a sound that mixed agony with profound incomprehension and spun away, clutching his ruined arm. The second Viltrumite, adjusted mid-flight, aimed a kick at the anomaly's head. His shin impacted like a meteor. The bone-telescoped femur driving down through the knee joint with enough force that fragments punched through the skin on the opposite side. He fell from the sky, unable to even scream, body going into shock from trauma his Viltrumite physiology had never been designed to process. The third wrapped both arms around the bald man's chest from behind, attempting a restraint hold. Tried to squeeze. Her ribs cracked first, then her sternum breaking against arms that refused to compress. She released immediately, but the damage was done. Fell to the crater floor, gasping, each breath a fresh exercise in agony. The remaining 3 pulled back, hovering at a safe distance, staring at their wounded companions, with expressions that cycled through disbelief and dawning horror. Mark had seen that look before. On refugees fleeing Viltrumite conquest, on populations realizing they faced extinction. The look of beings confronting their own mortality after lifetimes of believing themselves invincible. "What did you do?" the scarred Viltrumite demanded. Her voice had lost its command authority. Now it just sounded young. The bald man looked at the 3 wounded Viltrumites with something approaching concern. "I didn't do anything. You guys attacked me." She stared at him, processing. The logic was irrefutable. They had initiated combat. The injuries were self-inflicted, caused by their own force meeting resistance they couldn't overcome, which meant this being hadn't actually fought back, hadn't counterattacked, had simply stood there and let physics do the work. The scarred Viltrumite made a decision. Tactical retreat, now. Commander, we can't, one of her subordinates started. That's an order. She grabbed the nearest wounded soldier, cradled his ruined arm against his chest. Her companions collected the other two. Fall back to Rally Point Sigma. We need fleet support. They launched skyward slower than they'd arrived, carrying their wounded. The scarred Viltrumite paused at 1,000 feet, looked back down at the bald man who'd already lost interest, and returned to examining his torn cape. She committed the image to memory. Would report it to her superiors. Would try to find words to describe the wrongness of that figure standing in devastation it hadn't meant to cause. She'd fought for 300 years, conquered 12 planetary systems, killed opponents whose names became legends. None of it had prepared her for something that won by simply existing. The bald man looked around at the wounded Viltrumites scattered across the crater floor. He seemed to consider something, then spoke to the empty air in the same flat tone he'd used all day. If anyone's actually listening to this, he said, addressing no one visible, I don't understand why you're still here. They keep attacking me. A pause. It's not really that interesting. He returned his attention to the scuff mark on his glove, apparently satisfied with this observation. Mark pulled himself to his feet, pain screaming through broken ribs. Limped toward the bald man, each step agony. They'll come back. With more. With everything they have. The bald man looked at him with mild curiosity. Why? Because you're a threat. Mark coughed, tasted copper. To them, to everyone. You've killed thousands of people just by being here. Oh. The bald man considered this, seemed to arrive at some internal conclusion. I should probably leave then. Mark opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. The statement was so simple, so obvious, so completely disconnected from the impossibility of its execution that he couldn't formulate a response. This being had survived everything Earth and Viltrum could throw at it, had accidentally ended thousands of lives through sheer durability, and its solution was just leave, as if dimensional travel were as simple as taking the bus. Can you do that? Mark finally asked. Just leave. The bald man shrugged. Probably not. I don't know how I got here. He pulled the expired coupon from his pocket, studied it with genuine disappointment. I just wanted vegetables on sale. Mark looked at the devastation surrounding them. The crater deep enough to hold an apartment building. The fires still burning in the distance. The bodies buried under rubble. The Viltrumite blood spattering the glass-smooth walls. All of it, every death, every injury, every moment of terror because a bald man in a yellow suit had been shopping. He started laughing, couldn't help it. The sound came out broken-edged with hysteria, but it came. Because the alternative was crying or screaming or surrendering to the profound absurdity of a universe where this could happen. Where thousands could die because someone fell through a dimensional rift while looking for produce. The bald man watched him laugh with the patient expression of someone waiting for a strange noise to stop. High above them, beyond atmosphere, Viltrumite command ships began calculating firing solutions. The Viltrumite strike force arrived 20 minutes later. Not 6 this time. 7 warriors in formation, each one a veteran of planetary conquest, selected specifically for coordinated assault capability. They descended through clouds that parted around their passage, white capes, streaming faces set with the grim determination of soldiers who'd reviewed footage of their predecessors' failures and believed they could succeed where others hadn't. Mark, still struggling to breathe through cracked ribs, pulled himself behind a slab of concrete and watched. He'd tried to leave, had made it 3 blocks before his legs gave out. Now he could only observe as the Viltrumite Empire deployed what he recognized as a purge formation, 7 points of attack designed to overwhelm planetary defense systems through synchronized strikes that hit simultaneously from all vectors. The lead Viltrumite, a male whose scarred face suggested centuries of combat, hovered at the crater's edge. His voice carried the flat authority of someone delivering an execution order. Target designation unknown. Threat level maximum. Authorization received from command. No capture protocol. Elimination only. The bald man looked up from where he'd been sitting on a chunk of rubble, still holding his expired coupon. He watched the 7 warriors take positions around him with the mild interest of someone observing pigeons. "Are there a lot more of you?" he asked. "This seems excessive." The lead Viltrumite didn't respond, didn't acknowledge the question, just raised one hand, held it for 2 seconds, and dropped it. The signal. All 7 moved, not sequentially, simultaneously. The air shattered with 7 overlapping sonic booms that merged into a single catastrophic pressure wave. They struck from different angles, high, low, lateral, diagonal, each trajectory calculated to leave no escape vector. Fists and feet and elbows and knees delivered with enough combined kinetic energy to crack a continental plate. The bald man disappeared under the assault. For half a second, Mark thought they'd done it. Thought the coordinated attack had overwhelmed whatever impossible durability the anomaly possessed. Then he heard it. A sound like temple bells, clear and resonant, as fists impacted flesh that refused to acknowledge damage. The first Viltrumite's punch connected with the bald man's jaw. His hand shattered, every bone from knuckles to wrist compressed into fragments, skin splitting as sharp edges tore through from inside. He pulled back, screaming, cradling the ruin. The second kicked at the ribs. His ankle twisted sideways, joint dislocating with a wet pop, audible even over the combat noise. Momentum carried him past the target, spiraling out of control, until he crashed into the crater wall hard enough to leave a body-shaped impression. The third tried a 2-handed overhead strike. Both wrists snapped on impact radius, and ulna bones breaking clean through. She fell from the sky, clutching her arms, howling. The fourth and fifth attacked in concert, one grappling from behind, while the other drove knees into the target's midsection. The grappler's shoulders dislocated instantly, arms pulled from sockets by resistance that exceeded any force he'd ever encountered. His partner's femurs cracked audibly one after the other, rapid percussion like breaking branches. The sixth went for a headlock, attempting to wrench the target's neck. His vertebrae compressed cervical spine taking damage meant for his opponent. He released immediately, dropped to the ground with coordination already failing. The seventh hesitated, pulled back mid-strike, watched his entire team reduced to broken soldiers in under 3 seconds. His tactical training warred with survival instinct, and survival won. He started to retreat. The bald man raised one hand. Not threateningly, not even deliberately from what Mark could see. Just lifted it with the casual motion of someone about to scratch an itch or adjust his collar. Then he threw a punch. Multiple punches. So many punches that they blurred together into a continuous stream of motion, each one following the previous with mechanical precision. Fists moving faster than Mark's enhanced vision could track individually. The sound was like sustained thunder, a rolling boom that didn't stop, didn't pause, just continued in an unbroken wave of compressed air. The shock waves radiated outward in perfect circles. Not aimed at anyone, not targeted, just the inevitable consequence of fists moving through air at speeds that turned atmosphere into a weapon. The pressure waves caught the wounded Viltrumites, lifted them like leaves in a hurricane, and hurled them outward. They flew in 7 different directions, trailing blood limbs bent at angles that suggested additional fractures on top of their existing injuries. The last Viltrumite, The one who'd hesitated caught the edge of the pressure wave and tumbled backward through the air for 200 yards before he could stabilize. He watched his team scatter across the devastated city like seeds thrown from a hand. Some hit buildings, some hit street. All of them stopped moving after impact. The bald man lowered his hands and looked at them with faint surprise, as if he'd forgotten he could do that. "Oh," he said to the empty air. "That usually works better." Mark stared. His mind, already stretched past reasonable limits by the day's accumulated impossibilities, tried to process what he'd just witnessed. The bald man hadn't aimed at anyone, hadn't targeted specific opponents, had just thrown punches at nothing, and the ambient effect, the mere side consequence of fists displacing air, had been sufficient to incapacitate 7 of the Viltrum Empire's elite warriors. The final Viltrumite hovered at a distance, breathing hard despite his species-enhanced stamina. Mark could see the decision forming behind his eyes. Report back. Warn command. Accept the humiliation of retreat, because the alternative was joining his team in unconsciousness or worse. He flew upward, accelerating hard, pushing past Mach 5 in seconds. Didn't look back. Couldn't afford to. Mark pulled himself from behind the concrete slab and limped toward the bald man who'd returned his attention to the expired coupon. Up close, Mark could see the complete absence of exertion. No sweat, no elevated breathing, no tension in the shoulders or evidence of adrenaline. The man had just defeated 7 Viltrumite soldiers and appeared less winded than if he'd climbed a single flight of stairs. "They're going to keep coming," Mark said. His voice came out rough, damaged. "They'll send more. Stronger ones. Their leader." He paused, thinking of the reports he'd heard. "Thrag. They'll send Thrag." The bald man looked at him with that same patient expression, waiting for the point. "He's different," Mark continued. "He's not like the others. He's their strongest, their most experienced. And he won't stop until—" He stopped himself. Until what? Until he died trying. Until he broke every bone in his body, attacking an opponent who couldn't be hurt. The absurdity threatened to trigger another laughing fit. He swallowed it down. "You need to leave. Find a way. Go anywhere but here." "I told you," the bald man said. "I don't know how I got here." Mark wanted to scream, wanted to grab the anomaly and shake him and make him understand the scale of what was coming. Wanted to explain that the Viltrum Empire didn't lose, didn't retreat, didn't accept defeat. That they would send everything they had, would sacrifice every soldier, would reduce the planet to rubble if necessary, to eliminate a threat this magnitude. But he looked at the bald man's face. Bored patient, utterly disconnected from any concept of danger, and realized the futility. This being existed outside the framework that governed everyone else's reality. Didn't understand stakes, didn't process threat. Just wanted to buy groceries and found the universe's violent objection to his presence mildly inconvenient. Above them, beyond sight, beyond the planet's atmosphere, a single Viltrumite ship adjusted its trajectory. Inside, a figure sat on a throne forged from the skull of a species that had resisted conquest. Thrag, Grand Regent of the Viltrum Empire, watched tactical feeds with eyes that had witnessed 10,000 battles and lost none. He'd seen the footage, reviewed every angle, watched Nolan fall, watched elite teams shatter themselves against resistance that shouldn't exist in biological form. Other commanders might have hesitated, might have called for orbital bombardment or biological weapons, or simply abandoned this insignificant world to whatever anomaly had manifested there. Thrag stood, his white cape settled around shoulders that had carried the weight of an empire for centuries. He walked toward the airlock with the measured pace of absolute confidence. He would descend, would engage, would break this aberration through sheer application of Viltrumite superiority, because anything less was unthinkable. The anomaly had survived everything thrown at it through passive resistance. Had endured without technique, without strategy, without apparent effort. Thrag had conquered through understanding his opponents, through exploiting weakness, through the application of violence refined over millennia into perfect art. He would not shatter himself on the anomaly's durability like the others, would not waste strength on futile assault. He would find the limit. Everyone had a limit. Every defense given sufficient force applied correctly eventually failed. The airlock opened. Thrag launched himself toward Earth with the trajectory of a falling star. The planet's atmosphere would burn around him. The city below would register his approach on every sensor. The anomaly would look up and see death descending. And then Grand Regent Thrag would teach this universe a lesson it seemed to have forgotten, that nothing, no matter how durable, could withstand forever against a Viltrumite who refused to stop. Mark watched the sky and saw a new contrail forming. Straight, direct, accelerating. Not the scattered formation of multiple warriors, just one, coming fast. The bald man followed his gaze upward, squinting slightly against the afternoon sun. He spoke to the empty air voice, as flat as ever. "If anyone's still paying attention to all this fighting," he said to no one visible, "maybe leave a note somewhere about where to find good grocery stores. I'm running out of options." He scratched his head, still watching the contrail. "This really is taking a long time." "He's here," Mark said quietly. Thrag hit the atmosphere at Mach 12, his descent trajectory a pillar of fire that scorched clouds and turned air to plasma. He didn't slow, didn't adjust course, just fell like divine judgment toward the crater where sensors confirmed the anomaly still stood. The sonic boom arrived 3 seconds before he did, shattering every remaining intact window within 5 miles and triggering a pressure wave that knocked Mark flat. The Grand Regent landed with an impact that split the crater floor, adding another 6 feet of depth to excavation that already resembled a meteor strike. Dust billowed outward. Rock fragments pelted the surrounding ruins like shrapnel. When the dust cleared, Thrag stood 20 feet from the bald man. White cape pristine despite the violence of his arrival, mustache bristling with barely contained aggression. He was bigger than the other Viltrumites. Taller, broader, muscle density that suggested he could bench press mountains without straining. Scars crossed his face and arms, each one a testament to battles that had pushed him closer to death than anyone else in the Empire. His eyes held the flat certainty of someone who'd killed planets and felt nothing. "You are the anomaly," Thrag said. Not a question. A statement of fact delivered in a voice that could freeze stars. "I have reviewed the data, analyzed every engagement. You possess unprecedented durability. You do not counterattack. You survive through passive resistance." He rolled his shoulders, a gesture that looked almost casual. "I am Thrag, Grand Regent of the Viltrum Empire, and I will show you that even the impossible has limits." The bald man looked up at him with the same tired expression he'd worn all day. "Are you the last one? Because I really need to find a store." Thrag's jaw tightened. He'd expected fear, or defiance, or at least recognition of the threat he represented. This casual dismissal, treating a Grand Regent like an inconvenience, registered as either profound disrespect or complete disconnection from reality. Either way, the response would be identical. He moved, not at testing speed, not with caution. At full velocity, closing the distance in a microsecond with his fist already accelerating toward maximum impact force. The punch carried enough kinetic energy to split tectonic plates, delivered with technique refined across centuries of warfare. It connected with the bald man's face and stopped. Thrag felt the resistance, felt his knuckles compress against flesh that refused to yield, felt the shock wave ripple back up his arm, testing ligaments and bone structure. But he'd prepared for this, had studied the footage, had known what to expect. His bones held. His technique distributed the force. He pulled back and struck again and again and again. The crater floor buckled beneath them. Each punch generated pressure waves that radiated outward, demolishing what little remained standing. Thrag varied his approach: hooks, uppercuts, straight jabs. Each one delivered with precision that turned violence into mathematics. He targeted the jaw, the temple, the solar plexus, anywhere structural damage might accumulate. The bald man's head moved maybe half an inch with each impact. His expression didn't change. Thrag shifted tactics, grabbed the anomaly by the head with both hands, and drove his knee upward. The impact echoed across the ruined city. Drove it again, again. 7 times in 2 seconds, each strike faster than the last. Then he released, stepped back, and delivered a roundhouse kick with enough force to decapitate a mountain. His shin connected with the bald man's ribs and stopped. The pressure wave from impact stripped concrete from rebar for 100 feet in every direction. Mark, watching from behind rubble, felt the shock wave compress his chest hard enough to crack another rib. The bald man swayed slightly like a building in mild wind and righted himself. "Okay," Saitama said quietly. His voice carried no anger, no challenge, just mild acknowledgement. "You're pretty tough." Thrag stared. In 1,000 years of combat, no opponent had ever responded to his assault by calling him tough. Tough implied the anomaly had noticed the attack, had processed the force, had evaluated Thrag's capabilities and found them worthy of comment but insufficient to matter. The Grand Regent grabbed Saitama by the shoulders and flew upward, straight up, accelerating past Mach 5, past Mach 10, punching through the atmosphere at speeds that turned the air around them into an inferno. They broke orbit in 40 seconds. The planet fell away, below beautiful and blue and irrelevant. Thrag positioned himself above the anomaly, braced against the void, and hammered downward. Not punches now, not kicks, just pure driving force, using his entire body as a weapon, slamming the bald man downward through vacuum toward the planet below. They re-entered atmosphere trailing fire. The friction alone should have incinerated anything biological. The bald man's suit showed scorch marks. His cape burned at the edges. His expression remained unchanged. They struck the Pacific Ocean at a 20-degree angle, displacing enough water to generate a tsunami that would reach shorelines thousands of miles away. The impact sent them through a mile of ocean in seconds, through the seabed into volcanic rock deeper still, into the mantle where temperatures exceeded anything found on the planet's surface. Thrag didn't stop, couldn't stop, had committed to this course and would follow it to conclusion regardless of cost. He drove them through molten rock, through geological layers compressed by eons, through strata that hadn't seen light since the planet formed. The heat charred his skin. The pressure crushed his uniform. His Viltrumite durability screamed at tolerances it wasn't designed to handle. He punched through into a massive cavern, some ancient void trapped beneath continental plates, released his grip, and struck the bald man with everything he had left. Right, left, right, left. A rhythm of destruction that echoed through stone. His hands bled. His knuckles split. His bones began to fracture under the sustained impact against resistance that wouldn't break. The bald man stood there and took it. Didn't fight back. Didn't even raise his hands to block. Just stood in the center of the earth and absorbed punishment that should have killed him 10,000 times over. Thrag's breathing deepened. Sweat mixed with blood on his face. His mustache hung ragged. His cape had burned away entirely. For the first time in his life, Grand Regent Thrag felt something he'd spent centuries teaching others to feel. Doubt. "What are you?" His voice came out raw. The same question everyone had asked. The same inadequate words trying to grasp the impossible. The bald man tilted his head slightly, considered the question with what might have been genuine thought. A hero, I guess. He paused. For a hobby. The words hit harder than any physical blow. Not defiant, not mocking, just honest. This being this impossible creature that had survived everything Viltrum's finest could deliver, considered heroism a hobby. Something to do casually, without investment, without pride or purpose or any of the things that made warriors what they were. Thrag felt something crack. Not bones, not physically, something deeper. The foundational certainty that had carried him through 1,000 years of conquest. The belief that strength and will and technique could overcome any obstacle fractured like glass under pressure. It couldn't withstand, he screamed. Pure rage, pure denial. And attacked again with abandon that crossed the line from warrior discipline into desperation. He battered the anomaly with strikes that had no technique, no strategy, just animal need to make something yield. His fists shattered further, his arms cracked. Blood flew with every impact. The bald man raised one hand. Not to block, not defensively, just lifted it with the casual motion of someone about to swat a fly. He pushed Thrag's chest, gently, with one finger, extended his arm in a motion that barely qualified as a shove. Thrag flew backward, as if struck by a moon. The force didn't build gradually, didn't accelerate, just existed instantly, launching him through solid rock like it was mist. He punched through the cavern wall, through miles of compressed earth, through the mantle, through the ocean floor, through a mile of water out into air. He kept going, up, through atmosphere, through clouds, through the thin air of the stratosphere, past where Earth's gravity had any meaningful pull. His trajectory perfect, unchanging, carrying him outward with momentum that wouldn't fade. The moon grew larger in his vision, grew from a distant sphere to a massive wall of gray stone and ancient craters. He had 3 seconds to comprehend where he was going. 3 seconds to understand that the bald man's gentle push had imparted enough kinetic energy to launch him on an intercept course with Earth's satellite. He hit the lunar surface at 18,000 miles per hour. The impact created a crater visible from Earth. Shock waves rippled across the moon's surface, triggering avalanches of dust in airless silence. Thrag bounced, tumbled, carved a trench 2 miles long before friction finally arrested his momentum. He lay there. Not unconscious Viltrumite physiology didn't permit easy unconsciousness, but broken in ways that transcended the physical. Every bone had stress fractures. Every organ screamed damage. His healing factor worked overtime, knitting tissue and bone, but couldn't touch the injury that mattered most. He'd lost. Completely. Absolutely. Not through being outfought or outsmarted, but through encountering something that existed outside the paradigm where fighting meant anything. Where strength mattered. Where 1,000 years of experience amounted to nothing against a being that won by simply being present. Thrag pushed himself to his hands and knees, looked back at Earth, small and blue and distant. Somewhere down there, the anomaly still stood in that crater, probably still thinking about groceries, completely unaware that it had just shattered the invincible reputation of the Viltrum Empire's strongest warrior. He coughed blood, started laughing, couldn't help it. The sound came out broken-edged with something that might have been hysteria or might have been understanding. All his strength, all his experience, all the pride of Viltrum. None of it mattered. None of it had ever mattered. 3 surviving Viltrumites from the earlier strike force appeared at his position, having tracked his trajectory from orbital distance. They landed carefully, approaching their Grand Regent, with the caution of soldiers who'd never seen him anything but invincible. One of them, the youngest, spoke carefully. "Sir orders." Thrag looked at him. Really looked. Saw the fear there. the uncertainty, the desperate hope that their leader would have an answer, would know what to do, would restore the certainty that made them what they were. "Retreat," Thrag said quietly. His voice carried none of its usual authority, just acceptance. "This isn't over, but it's over for today." The youngest warrior started to protest. Stopped when he saw Thrag's eyes, saw something there that made arguing impossible. They took flight, carrying their Grand Regent between them, ascending toward the command ship that waited in high orbit. Thrag looked back one more time at Earth. At the continent where a bald man in a yellow suit stood surrounded by devastation, made a promise to himself. Not revenge, not renewed assault, just acknowledgement. He would return, would try again, would keep trying until he found the limit or died in the attempt, because that's what Grand Regent Thrag did. What he was. But for the first time in 1,000 years, he acknowledged the possibility that some limits couldn't be found, that some opponents couldn't be beaten, that some things simply were, and no amount of Viltrumite pride could change them. On Earth, in the center of a crater 300 feet deep, Saitama looked at his hand where he'd pushed the aggressive man, flexed his fingers experimentally. "I thought I barely touched him," he said to no one. Mark pulled himself from the rubble ribs, screaming, vision blurry from accumulated damage, looked at the bald man with something between awe and despair. "He's gone. They're gone. You won." Saitama shrugged. "I didn't fight. They just kept attacking." He pulled the expired coupon from his pocket, examined it one more time with profound sadness, then crumpled it. "I need to find out how to get home." Mark wanted to laugh, wanted to cry, settled for sitting down hard on broken concrete and staring at the sky where a new crater on the moon was probably visible if you knew where to look. The strongest warrior in the known universe had just been defeated by someone who considered the whole affair an annoying distraction from grocery shopping. The absurdity should have felt like comedy. Instead, it just felt exhausting. The GDA bunker fell silent for the first time in 6 hours. Every screen showed the same impossible image, a new crater on the lunar surface visible through telescopes, proof that their planet's strongest threat had just casually launched the galaxy's most feared warrior into orbit. The analysts sat frozen at their stations, unable to process what victory looked like when it came from something that hadn't even been trying. Cecil Stedman stood before the main display and still clasped behind his back expression. Carved from the same stone it had been at the start, but something had shifted in his eyes. Not relief, not gratitude, just the cold calculation of someone realizing that the anomaly's departure was now the only acceptable outcome, and that making it happen had just become his sole priority. "Get me Robot," he said quietly. "Tell him I'm authorizing access to the Levy archive. Every file, every piece of hardware we recovered, everything." Donald appeared at his shoulder tablet, already updating with security clearances. "Sir, the Levy technology is unstable. We've had 3 researchers hospitalized just from proximity to—" "I don't care." Cecil turned and Donald recognized the look. The one that meant acceptable losses had just been recalculated. "That thing is still here, still standing in my city. And until it's gone, we're one accident away from extinction. 300 miles away, in an underground facility that officially didn't exist, Robot stood before a vault door sealed with locks designed to contain technology too dangerous for human understanding. The dimensional rift generator that Angstrom Levy had used to navigate the multiverse, confiscated after the Coalition's defeat, stored and studied but never activated. Until now. His cybernetic hands moved across control panels with mechanical precision, inputting codes that broke every safety protocol the GDA had established. The vault door opened. Inside, machinery hummed with barely contained energy circuits, glowing with colors that didn't exist in conventional spectrum. He began the calculations. Probability matrices for dimensional frequency. resonance patterns that might align with wherever the anomaly had originated. 97% chance of catastrophic failure, 3% chance of creating a stable portal. Good enough. Mark sat in the crater and watched the bald man examine his torn cape with the focused attention of someone discovering a stain on their favorite shirt. The sun had begun to set, painting the devastation in shades of orange and red that made the whole scene look like the aftermath of divine punishment. Bodies still lay buried in rubble. Fires still burned in buildings that would never be occupied again. Somewhere in the distance, emergency sirens wailed their endless song. "They're going to try to send you back," Mark said. His voice came out rough, damaged. Every word hurt. "Using technology from someone who almost destroyed our world. It might not work. Might kill you. Might tear another hole in reality and make everything worse." The bald man looked at him with mild interest. "Okay," Mark laughed. It came out wet, painful. "You don't care, do you, about any of this? The people who died, the city that's gone, Thrag up there on the moon, probably planning his next attempt?" He gestured at the devastation surrounding them. "None of it matters to you." "I didn't mean for it to happen," Saitama said. His voice held no defensiveness, no guilt, just that same flat statement of fact. "I was just shopping." "I know." Mark looked at his hands. Viltrumite hands capable of incredible destruction, utterly useless against the real threats. "That's what makes it worse. You're not evil. You're not even dangerous, not really. You're just here, and that's enough to break everything." A low hum began to build in the air. Not sound exactly, more like pressure. Reality doing something it wasn't designed to do. A point in the center of the crater began to shimmer, space folding in on itself with the visual distortion of heat haze. The shimmer expanded, tearing open into a jagged wound that showed nothing beyond its edge. Just darkness. Absolute and complete. Robot's voice crackled through every speaker still functioning in the vicinity. "Portal is stable. Repeat, portal is stable. Duration estimated at 90 seconds before collapse. Recommend immediate transit." Saitama stood, brushed dust from his suit one more time, and picked up the torn cape. He looked at the portal with the same expression he'd worn all day. Tired, bored, ready to go home. He turned to Mark. "What were you doing?" Mark asked. "Before you fell through. Where were you going?" "Supermarket," Saitama said. "Saturday sale on vegetables. Ends at 5. He glanced at the darkening sky. Probably missed it. Mark wanted to say something profound. Wanted to thank him for accidentally saving his life, or warn him about the dangers of dimensional travel, or ask if beings like him existed elsewhere in the multiverse. Instead, he just said, "Good luck finding another sale." Saitama paused at the portal's edge and turned back, not to Mark, but to the empty air beside him. "If anyone enjoyed watching this," he said in his characteristic monotone, "I guess that's fine, but I really need to go buy vegetables." He considered this. "If you see another one of these situations, maybe don't watch. It's boring." A shrug. "I'm going home now." Saitama nodded once to Mark, a gesture that might have been acknowledgement or might have been goodbye, and walked toward the portal. His footsteps crunched on broken concrete. He reached the edge, paused, looked back one time at the ruined city, and shrugged. Then, he stepped through. The portal collapsed immediately. The pressure in the air released. Space returned to normal. The crater stood empty except for Mark and the accumulated debris of the worst day in his planet's history. Mark sat there for a long time, watching the stars appear as the sun finished setting. Somewhere up there, Thrag was probably watching the same stars nursing injuries that would heal, but memories that wouldn't. Somewhere in the city, Cecil was calculating recovery costs and political fallout. Somewhere across the planet, people were just learning what had happened, trying to comprehend how their world had changed. And somewhere in another dimension, a bald man in a torn yellow suit was probably checking his watch and wondering if any stores were still open. Mark pulled himself to his feet. Every bone screamed, every muscle ached. He'd survived an encounter with something that existed outside the framework of everything he understood about power and strength and what was possible. Had learned that the universe contained beings so far beyond his comprehension that they could end civilizations without noticing. He flew upward slowly, painfully ascending through air that still smelled like smoke and blood. Below him, the crater stretched like a wound in the earth. Around it, the city lay broken. Beyond that, the world continued ignorant of how close it had come to something it couldn't survive. In his bunker, Cecil watched the satellite feeds confirm the anomaly's departure. Watched the portal collapse without secondary effects. Watched the crisis resolve itself through sheer blind luck and unstable technology. He pulled up casualty reports. Final count 8,347 dead. 12,000 injured. Damages in the hundreds of billions. He closed the reports. Opened a new file labeled Contingency Protocol Anomaly Return. Started typing, because anomalies didn't always stay gone. And if it came back, he would be ready. Would have plans, would have weapons designed specifically for threats that couldn't be hurt. Would probably fail again. But that was the job. High above Earth in Viltrumite command ships preparing for departure, Threg stood before his senior officers and delivered his report. 3 words that would reshape Viltrum's understanding of the universe. We are outmatched. The officers stared, waited for elaboration, for explanation, for the Grand Regent to tell them how they would adapt, how they would overcome, how Viltrumite superiority would prevail. Thrag said nothing else. Just turned and walked to his quarters, carrying the weight of 1,000 years' certainty that had shattered in a single afternoon. The stars beyond the viewport looked different now. Colder, more dangerous, full of things that might exist beyond even Viltrumite comprehension. Somewhere in the multiverse, in a small apartment with peeling paint and cheap rent, a bald man in a yellow suit walked through his front door at 8:47 p.m. He hung his torn cape on a hook, noticed he'd forgotten to buy vegetables, sighed, checked the calendar for next week's sales. His day off had been weird, but at least he was home. He walked to the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed in the silence. He opened it, empty, completely empty. He stared at the bare shelves for 5 full seconds, then spoke to the vacant room. Still here. His voice carried no emotion, just observation. I don't have anything interesting, no food, no fights, nothing. He closed the refrigerator. You should probably stop paying attention now. This is as boring as it gets. He walked toward the bathroom to wash the dust from his suit. His footsteps were the only sound in the universe.